Veiled in the smoky violet of evening, the Ashwick Athenaeum rose from the moor like a cathedral to forgotten knowledge, its flaherty-tipped spires impaling a sky swollen with frost-laden clouds. The carriage that bore Clara Everhart rattled to a halt beneath the porte cochere, its lamps flickering as though cowed by the looming facade. Clara, senior archivist to the Royal Bibliographic Society, stepped onto flagstones so cold they seemed to drain the warmth from her bones. She had accepted the Society's commission catalogue, the private collection of Lord Ashwick, recently bequeathed to the Crown, because she lived for the silent electricity of old pages. Only now, as she stared at gargoyles, eroded into expressions of terminal sorrow, did she recall the rumors spoken in low tavern voices. The Athenaeum was built over a medieval plague pit, its vaults thrumming with unquiet history. A slender figure detached itself from the shadows near the arched doors. "Miss Everhart, we are honored." His voice possessed the attenuation of a bowstring drawn near breaking. "I am Keeper Blease, steward of this library since my father's death. I trust your journey was tolerable?" "Uneventful," Clara lied. She had been unable to sleep, unnerved by a reek iron and mildew that seeped through the coach windows as they crossed the moor. She followed Blaze beneath a tympanum carved with emaciated monks clutching scrolls to their chests like makeshift shields against plague. The vestibule yawned into a nave-like hall lit by sputtering gas jets. Everywhere books towered, serried behind bars of wrought iron and latticed walkways. The air vibrated with a damp hush, as though every volume exhaled through pages still wet with memory. Blaze led her across a mosaic floor depicting Saint Sebastian, riddled with arrows of quills. "I must speak plainly," he said. "This collection resists ordinary stewardship. The catalogue you were sent in London is already inaccurate." "It is nearly 2 centuries old," Clara replied, removing her gloves to feel the chill marble. "An update is precisely why I'm here." The corners of Blease's mouth quivered. "The errors are not due to time. They accrue nightly." She laughed softly, but the sound clanged against the stone. "Books do not migrate of their own accord, Mr. Blaze." He said nothing further, only escorted her to a suite in the north transept, where a fire languished, leaving more shadows than warmth. Her trunks were stacked beside a narrow bed, hung with drapes embroidered in a motif of bones, intertwined with vines. "Ring if you require anything," Blaze murmured, "and be certain the lamps are kept lit from dusk until dawn. Extinguish them, and the dark remembers." After he left, Clara unpacked her instruments, plain gloves, soft brushes, vials of clove oil, a brass tally clicker, attempting to dispel his unsettling words. Yet as she drifted into sleep, a smell like old pennies seeped from beneath the floorboards, and distant in the stacks, a single note sounded, halfway between a sigh and a page-turning. Morning revealed the library in kinder hues. Sunlight sieved through clerestory windows, painting drifting dust motes gold. Blythe supplied tea and a sheaf of keys, apologizing for his abruptness. "The collection numbers some 83,000 volumes," he said. "I pray you work swiftly. The end of winter approaches." "Does the season matter?" "Every calendar bears its revenant festival," he replied, cryptic as scripture. Clara began in the Western Annulus, where incunabula huddled in oaken cases. She recorded titles, dates, and conditions, noting wormholes and foxes. Yet anomalies appeared. A Florentine herbal previously catalogued as 1496 now bore a colophon dated 1542, its Latin preface replaced by a litany of names unfamiliar, hundreds of them etched in a brownish ink that had seeped through 3 layers of vellum as though still wet. Curious, Clara dabbed the script with a pH strip. The indicator blushed crimson. "Impossible," she muttered. Dried iron gall ink could not test positive for fresh hemoglobin. She reshelled the herbal, but the parchment retained a faint, sticky warmth. At luncheon, she confronted Blease. Several books have clearly been altered, and not decades ago. Last night, perhaps this very dawn. He clasped a silver reliquary worn at his throat. They are writing their own eulogies. Who? The ones beneath. He gestured downward. You feel them, do you not? That copper taste in the lungs? The pit runs the depth of the hill. 6,000 dead by plague, poured into a common grave and sealed with quicklime. When Lord Ashwick's great-grandfather laid the foundation, the builders found bones still clinging to scraps of burial shroud. He continued regardless, believing knowledge could consecrate horror. Blaby's eyes gleamed with an admixture of awe and dread. He was half right. The dead are eager scholars. Claire balked. You mean to say the plague victims are authoring these changes? Not authoring, correcting. Blaze's voice collapsed to a whisper. They were buried nameless, stacked like firewood. But a name, Miss Everhart, is the only citadel the plague could not storm. They want their record, and they will have it, in blood if no ink is offered. Before Clara could reply, a resonance tremored through the stacks, rattling chains that suspended a brass chandelier overhead. The flames guttered blue. That evening, Clara examined the Athenaeum's founding ledger. The volume was leathered in human skin. She recognized the unmistakable fine grain and secured by a clasp of tarnished brass. Opening it released a pungent breath, sweet yet rotten. The first pages described expenditures, quarried stone, Baltic oak, cartloads of lime. But further along, neat copperplate turned ragged, scrawled by an unsteady hand. The whispering grows. They insist upon their inventory. Ink dries too swiftly to hold their litany. Blood alone flows at their bidding. Below the sentence, faint, rusty fingerprints stippled the margin. Clara's pulse quickened. She recalled the herbal's sanguine scribbles, the sticky warmth. The phenomenon was no hoax. It had persisted across generations. Becker stopped. He could persist across generations. She drafted a memo for the society, describing biochemical anomalies requiring investigation. But the pen spluttered, refusing to leave a mark. The ink in her inkwell had clotted to a thick, dark jelly. When she pried off the stopper, a thin filament stretched between glass and quill, viscous as tissue. The odor rising from it belonged not to ink, but to a butcher's pail. Candles trembled. From beyond her chamber door came a wet scratching, like fingers drawing across parchment. Not nails on wood, but skin on skin. Clara slammed the ledger shut, shoved a dresser against the handle, and kept vigil until dawn, lamp raised against the rippling dark. On the second day she descended to the undercroft, driven by archivist compulsion. When evidence evades daylight, chase it into gloom. Blease refused to accompany her. I am keeper of the tomes, not the tomb, he said, handing her a storm lantern whose glass was stained the color of congealed wine. A corkscrew stair opened into catacombs, framed by ribbed vaults. The lantern revealed alcoves packed floor to ceiling with manuscript coffers, their lids warped by damp. Underfoot, flagstones were inset with plaques bearing the library's classification system. Yet the lettering had been overwritten in that same brownish script, each plaque now displaying a single human name. She knelt to study one. Margaret Holloway, taken in the sweating of her 6 summers, 1349. The words pulsed faintly, as if the stone carried a heartbeat. Farther in, the stairs terminated at an iron gate. Beyond lay the plague pit proper, a cylindrical abyss where incense of decay had never dispersed. The lantern's beam fell upon a scene of stark lunacy. Books, thousands of them, were suspended in mid-air, pages fluttering, though no draft stirred. A murmur filled the chamber, each whisper a separate syllable, coalescing into a dirge of names. As she watched, crimson droplets oozed from the margins of a folio Bible and drifted sidelong until touching the blank leaves of a psalter, upon which letters erupted like blossoming wounds. William Fletcher, his lungs blackened by God's silences. Clara's breaths became shallow. She shifted the lantern, and its spore of light illuminated a half-camacked ladder descending into bone. Tibias and femurs jutted like the staves of an undone cathedral, skulls grinning between like escaped punctuation. At the bottom something glimmered, a chalice filled to the lip with ink. No, not ink. The surface quivered under an invisible wind, dark as the hollow between stars. She fled. Night brought snow that spangled the mullioned windows, but cold could not deter the sanguinary miracles within. Clara stationed herself at a podium in the great rotunda, desperate to witness the mechanism. At the 11th struck hour, the gas lamps dimmed, unbidden. She smelled violets crushed in a mortuary drawer. Then the pages began to bleed. Lines of text dissolved, letters liquefying into scrawls that slithered across vellum like worms seeking loam. They reassembled into testimonies, each name paired with a single sentence describing a death. Choked in phlegm, seized by purple carbuncles, coughed to rags. The process was hypnotic. Clara heard her tally clicker fall from her nerveless hand, clattering across marble. When she bent to retrieve it, a droplet spattered her wrist. Warmth spread. Not ink, not blood. Something between. She wiped it with a linen square, but threads fused to her skin. Panic flared. She yanked the cloth away, leaving a wheel shaped like a cursive S that slowly faded. A voice whispered from behind a stack. "Archivist." She turned, heart cannoning. No one appeared. "Archivist," the voice insisted, emanating from every alcove. "We have waited." "For what?" she managed. "For the litany to be spoken by one still warm." Suddenly she understood the ledger's final admonition. They insist upon their inventory. Ink dries too swiftly. Blood alone flows at their bidding. The dead wanted a tongue, not merely a pen. They hungered to hear their story recited, to feel breath move the syllables of their stolen name. Clara backed away, but the floor convulsed. Through seams between flagstones seeped a syrupy crimson that coalesced, rising into ghastly shapes, shadow puppets stitched in clotting blood. They had faces, blurred by plague swellings, yet their eyes glittered with lucidity. "Speak us," they chorused. "Bind us to the page, or the page will bind to flesh yours." Ink turned viscous on the desk, veins fibrillating across parchment. The boundary between script and sinew was unraveling. Soon parchment itself would vivify, reconstituting the library's silence into a roiling anatomy of grievance. Clara called for Blease. Her voice ricocheted unanswered. The specters advanced, their forms collapsing and reknitting like smoke gripped by wind. She stood at the edge of hysteria when memory saved her. In childhood, her mother had recited parish rolls at the village remembrance mass, naming war dead so their rest remained untroubled. Names, spoken, were sacraments. Could such a rite quell even this necromantic hunger? She seized a volume, Ashwick's own census of 1349, recently transcribed in London, but long missing its second folio. Within, columns of names ended abruptly at H. She flipped to a blank page, put her pen to it. The nib refused, clogged by the earlier clotting. In despair, she pricked her thumb with a brass paper knife. Blood welled. The nib drank greedily. She wrote, "I, Clara Everhart, bear witness." The letters shone. Around her, the whispering paused, as though the dead inhaled. She began to read aloud the first overwritten names she had encountered. Margaret Holloway, taken in the sweating of her 6 summers, 1349. William Fletcher, his lungs blackened by God's silence. The specters stilled. Blood that puddled on the floor receded, as if drawn by gravity, reversed into the words themselves. Encouraged, she read on, inventing a cadence that rose like a Gregorian chant. The books joined, their pages turning so rapidly the sound resembled a forest in gale. Each time she spoke a name, the corresponding phantom dissolved, threads of claret unwinding back into scholars' spines. Yet the air grew heavy. For every name she uttered, she felt a fraction of her warmth bleed through the cut on her thumb. The ledger had warned, blood alone flows at their bidding. She sensed a tacit pact, give voice, give blood or lose flesh entirely. But if she ceased, the Shia Vaught will be a voice. The nascent monstrosity writhing in the pages would be born. She pressed on, throat raw, candles dying. Hours passed. Dawn blushed the windows, yet still names remained. Her vision blurred. The letters squirmed like carrion flies. The cut on her thumb had ceased to bleed. Coagulation taxed by her offering, and so she sliced her palm, wincing as hot threads coursed down her wrist to stain the parchment. When she neared the ledger's conclusion, a hush fell. Blaze appeared from the corridor, face gaunt with sleepless terror. "Miss Everhart," he rasped. "The ink." She followed his gaze. The blood on the page no longer looked like blood. Its gleam dulled into the matte sepia of dried ink. The transformation was complete. Memory rendered, violence stilled. Together they surveyed the rotunda. The books lay dormant. Pages no longer fluttered. No spectral figures haunted the aisles. Instead, a tied line of brown script now girdled many volumes, each title appended with the name of a plague victim whose story had found harbor. Upon the floor, the crimson seepage had solidified into brittle scabs, crackling underfoot like autumn leaves. Clara sagged against the podium. Her wounds throbbed, yet no longer bled. She tasted copper, but also relief. Blaze approached, extending a bandage. "You have given them what generations withheld," he said. "The Athenaeum is quiet." "For now," she replied. Her voice was scarcely more than parchment rubbing parchment. He helped her to her chamber, and cleaned her cuts with spirits that burned white. Before she lost consciousness, she whispered, "Bind the census in iron, and shelve it in the undercroft. The dead do not forget, but memory must be kept at a distance." Weeks later, transported by rail to London, Clara submitted her final report to the Society. She concealed nothing: human skin bindings, self-praten texts, the blood liturgy that restored calm. An addendum recommended the library remain closed until the manufacture of a proper memorial, granite steels, engraved with the full plague roll. Only stone, she argued, possessed the eloquence of permanence without the appetite of flesh. The Society responded with restrained disbelief, promising a commission of inquiry. Yet certain of her colleagues cupped the report with gloved hands, eyes shining not with skepticism but covetous wonder. At home, Clara dreamed nightly of turning a page and finding her own name bleeding there, followed by a sentence still unwritten. She kept the brass tally clicker on her bedside table. Sometimes in the dark it clicked by itself, counting deaths no longer entirely past. Across the moor, spring quickened. Beneath thawing earth, the pit lay sealed, comforted by the echo of its spoken names. But deep in the catacombs, the chalice of black ink remained. From its surface rose the faintest ripple, as though stirred by a breath not quite content to rest, waiting for another archivist, another winter, another failure of remembrance, when ink, starved of blood, might once more turn yearningly to flesh.